Broadcasting from the KMF Collective Studio, it's time for the Keep Moving Forward podcast. Join us every week as we dive into the stories of remarkable current and former athletes that have transitioned into the real world. Now here's your host, Katie Galley.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the 238th episode of the Keep Moving Forward podcast. I'm your host, Katie Galley. In the KMF Collective Studio with me today, I have CEO and Managing Director at Whitman Inspiring High Performance and former collegiate football player and Green Beret in the U.S. Army Special Forces, Whitman. How are you doing, Court?
Hey, I'm incredible, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. No place else I'd rather be at this moment than with you and your listeners.
Well, thanks, Court. That means a heck of a lot. I'm really excited to dive in. So thanks for giving us your time. And so, Court, just to get the ball rolling and get to know your background a little bit, can you share with us where you grew up and how, if at all, was your childhood shaped by athletics?
Yeah, absolutely. Where I grew up, I'd say I'm a bit of a nomad. I am a son of Skip and Diane Whitman, my mom and dad. Shout out to parents, mine specifically. They're going to celebrate, or just celebrated, 46 years of marriage.
Wow.
Last June, which, being a divorced guy myself, I just treasure, in this moment, just to say that my folks are still together.
Yeah.
And my dad was in the Army. So, my dad played college football for West Point, super talented, out of New Jersey, was recruited, played it, and first got to go to college in his family, and so was in the Army. My mom, one of 6 kids in a Catholic family that was pulled out of there, right? I got so many there's probably 32 Catholic Whitman and Raffettos running around Jersey and New York, and then here we are, ripped out of it, meaning, I grew up in Hawaii because my dad was a soldier and his assignment took him there. And then I grew up in North Carolina, in and around Fort Bragg, which was the second assignment that my dad had while I was young and growing up. So, I would say as a kid growing up, I bounced around. Looking back on it now, I'm thankful for it because it taught me how to make new friends, right? How do I break into a new culture, which, as I now have a 10 and 11-year-old myself, those are really tough years. So that's kind of how I grew up. I would say while growing up, the things that we did is we loved hard. I'm also the oldest of 5 kids, so we got a family of 7. We went to church on Sunday, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That absolutely happened. And then we went, we kind of did our best at school. I would say I underperformed there a little bit because I was too busy playing sports and chasing girls. So that's kind of how I spent my time growing up. And the sports I played, at a young age, it was like soccer. Like soccer was the thing.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting as I reflect on it because football was my sport and what I played in college, but it was a long time. I didn't even play football specifically until my sophomore year of high school, just to set conditions here, but it was all soccer and baseball as a young kid growing up.
Man. So how did you make that shift? From soccer and baseball from a young age all the way through sophomore year of high school, because that is a, maybe not today, but it seems like a little bit of a later transition, or maybe not back then, a later transition into the sport that you would ultimately go to college for. So how or what prompted that transition into football?
Yeah, I think some of it was trying to find what I call my tribe, right? I think as a young adult, even I'd say child, maybe not child anymore when we're talking high school, but, I had recently moved from kind of the Fort Bragg area of North Carolina. My dad and mom decided to take us to a really small rural community in the foothills of North Carolina, a town called Elkin. So shout out to Elkin. And I'll tell you what, Elkin could be featured on Friday Night Lights. Let me tell you what this community does. They work their butt off, right? And they go watch football on Friday, right? And so what happened was I'm now injected at my sophomore year. I'm the new kid, right? I got my youngest brother still in diapers. He's got, tons of opportunity to meet people, but I'm the new kid. And, I'm kind of trying to meet folks and, yeah, well, what do you do? Right. I mean, as a kid, it's kind of like, where's your identity? Ah, yeah, I play soccer. Oh, well, that's not real cool here. Right. And
Yeah.
rural Elkin, North Carolina. Right. And so it was trying to fit in, trying to find my tribe. And I was like, all right, man, what can I do on this football field? Let me see if I can kick that football. Right. And I could kick the football. I might kick the 63-yard field goal in high school. Right. Which is like in rural North Carolina, they're like, man, this kid could kick. But then what happened was kicker's not too cool. So can this kid hit somebody? Right. And then you start to hit people and you're like, man, this thing called defense is pretty fun. And so I think the answer to your question is it was my ability to have an identity as a new kid in a new place, and my ability to find my people, but my people were always the athletes, right? Because I played, but in this new place, what was the signature sport? And it was football. And let's also be honest, I'm 5'10", so I got a dream to dunk a basketball. That ain't happening. Still didn't happen today. But it was also where I was best at.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, to be drawn to something, one, that was culturally where you were now kind of being grown and going into high school. And so wanting to fit in and find your tribe, find that group of friends. But then two, it's having that natural aptitude towards football. So Court, in that transition from then deciding, okay, I'm going to take my hand at football, see what I can do as a kicker, and then being able to tackle people, play defense, making that transition, did you ever wish you could still play soccer or think, man, I wish I was still playing this sport? Or once you started playing football, was it just all in, this is my sport, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, there was absolutely no return to soccer moment for me at all. I think that was one, and mostly, it just wasn't popular. And I'm being honest, right? I mean, and I think there's a lot of that for me in my life as I was in high school, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I'm really trying my best to frame appropriately here. This was a Friday night light town. Like it could have been Odessa, Texas. Wow. Multiple state championships. My head coach Richard Grissom at the time. We ended up naming the football stadium after him.
Wow.
I mean, it was just an incredible period of time for me to be there and to play that incredible sport. So there was no looking back. No looking back for me. Football was it.
Yeah, which is amazing to have that and to find something like that at that age and know that it's what you wanted to do. And so then, Court, from that time, did you already know that, okay, I want to see if I can take a next step and go to college and continue my football career? Or was it just kind of living in the moment in high school, playing under, in those Friday night lights and living there versus actually focusing on maybe what you wanted to do next with your football career?
I would say yes and no. Yes, meaning my love for sport, as I reflect back on it, is because it's what I call the non-traditional classroom. Right? It's that kind of the greatest leadership lab I think that exists. How do you compete? How do you become an effective positive influence? Right? How do you win the support of your team? How do you respond from setback when you get kicked in the tail? How do you get back up? And I did not want those experiences in my developmental journey to stop. And so the only way to keep playing was to play in college. So that's the yes. Like I wanted that because I saw how valuable it was for me and I wanted it to continue at the next level. The no was, I did not see myself being a pro athlete. I mean, if you're going to ask me today and probably for the past 20 years, what's my dream job is to play in the NFL, right? But that wasn't the cards for me, right? But what was in the cards for me was I wanted to be a soldier. And so what happened was my professional focus was how can I get into our Army? And if I can also play football, awesome. I was not recruited out of high school.
Man. So your whole aspiration then, it makes sense growing up and wanting to emulate your dad and do what he did and kind of living that life. So going into the Army, that was the primary goal. And then secondarily was, if I can play football, that would be great. It'd be fun, but that's not the ultimate aspiration that I have.
That's right. And so, as I began to kind of survey the landscape, right, I'm in North Carolina, I was way behind the power curve when it comes to competing for like a congressional appointment to the Naval Academy or West Point or the Air Force Academy. And, some of this, as I look back on it, was, I don't know that my parents in that moment in time had a heightened sensitivity of how do we help this kid? And I know they're going to listen to this show and they're probably going to throw tomatoes at me, right? But I mean, this is just kind of what, I'm the oldest of 5. My dad is building his own practice in the foothills of North Carolina. He's grinding, right? He's in his early 40s. My mom's got 4 other kids, one still in diapers. She's freaking soldiering in the home as a mom, and so there wasn't a whole lot of conversations about, hey, Court, what are you going to do next? Right. And I don't blame that on my parents. I just, as I look back on it and I see my younger brothers and kind of the way their journey went as they moved through high school, very different. Right.
Yeah.
And so what I'm getting at is I was behind the power curve because your junior year is when you kind of got to start those conversations with the service academies. And I thought in my mind, I said, to be a great soldier, I got to go to a military school. And so one of my greatest friends who I wrestled with in high school and I also played football with, Christopher O'Toole, was a classmate of mine. And he walked in one day to class with this is back in the day, right, when we still had paper collateral. So he had a book, right, on the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia. And he was like, I'm going here. It's like, man, let me check that place out. It was Division I, right? At that time, we were in the Southern Conference. So we're playing Appalachian State, Marshall, Georgia Southern, Wofford, really good, talented programs. And I went there for one visit and I was like, this is where I'm going to school. And I walked on the football team. And, that's kind of my road to college athletics. And just one quick story about that experience. So here I am, 1995. I'm a freshman. We don't even call it freshman. You call it a rat. What a great term, right? You're a rat. It's derogatory on purpose. I mean, West Point calls them plebes. BMI, we call them rats. But anyway, so I go to walk on the football team and I get absolutely destroyed, right? Because I think that's like maybe everyone's experience to a degree. That's not super talented athletically, but what I am is I'm incredibly coachable. I'm going to work my tail off, right? And I have incredible grit and effort. And so I remember going outside the stadium, and there's a payphone, right? I'm dating myself again here. No cell phones existed at this moment in time, unless you were like a freaking movie star. But I call my dad, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, Dad, this is really hard. I don't think I can do it. And my father says to me in that moment, well, what are you going to do? You're going to quit? You never quit anything in your life yet. Is this the first time we're going to embrace that sort of a habit? And, at the time, I didn't know how impactful that was going to be for my life. But I was like, no, I'm not. So hung up the phone and I kept at it. I earned a scholarship after my sophomore season. My head coach, Bill Stewart, was an incredible impact on my life. He's now passed. Wow. I mean, physically, like he's not with us anymore on this earth, but he went on to coach at West Virginia. And so it was just a blessing for me to play in college, have the experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Wow. So having that moment, you said now you can reflect back and really see how impactful it was having that conversation with your father. But was it just in your head at that time when you brought that up, are you going to quit? Was it just a challenge of, well, of course I'm not going to quit. I'm going to decide to stick to it and figure it out. Or, what happened? Was there something just that kind of flipped in you and made you decide you wanted to keep on and stay on the football team? Or, what kind of flipped in your head at that time?
Yeah, it's really pretty simple. It's challenge me. Challenge me, and I'm going to deliver. And as I look back on my life, and I didn't talk about this, but I'll highlight it here. I spent 46 days as an inpatient when I was 8 years old in a hospital. I was dying. Like my body was paralyzed. I suffered from an infection called subdural empyema, and there was like 3 known cases at that time. And some doctors ripped open my head, removed my frontal bone, sucked out an infection, and saved my life. Wow. Right. And so I wasn't intentionally not quitting in that moment, but as I draw inspiration from it now, because I feel like there's a purpose for my life, or God would have took it in that moment, and then when, my dad asked that question, I mean, my dad could have led in that moment and said, "Hey, Court, we don't quit in this family. You're a Whitman, suck it up." But he didn't say that, right? Because that's not as empowering as the inquiry of, "Hey, do you want to quit? Never have before. Is this the first time we start?" Because then I'm able to make the decision.
Right.
And so, I think it was the challenge. And I know when I look at the signature strengths that I have in my life, my number one signature strength is I am a competitor. I want to finish first. I revel in contests, and I want to be the very best at whatever it is I'm doing. And I want my teams that I'm a part of to also be the best. Yeah. So, it was the challenge in a very well-spoken way that my dad just has a gift for in some occasions. In most occasions, I would say.
Just most, not all of them. But it's key. I mean, you're right. Having those people at those key pivotal moments in your life, call that out of you. And it's not attacking you or coming after you. It's in that loving and encouraging way, because they've been there with you through your whole life and through your whole journey. And so, Court, just going back a little bit, that when you were 8 years old, that disease that you had, is that something that still lingers to this day? I mean, having that life-saving moment, or was it just something that happened when you were younger and it's, you've been able to move past it?
Yeah, no, it was absolutely an isolated moment when I was younger.
Wow.
There were some post-op kind of speculation of, hey, based upon what we did, is this kid going to be able to smell again, right? And some other things, but I had 100% recovery. Funny story, this was in the years when soccer was really important in my life, and I still remember the story of my parents sharing with me, "Hey, Court, when you came out of surgery and you had 75 staples and 133 sutures kind of across your head, all you wanted to do was go play sport." And to the extent that we didn't really want you to, because we were concerned, right? But my parents acquiesced and basically said, "Hey, if you wear a bicycle helmet, we'll let you play soccer." So I had no problem at 8-year-old. Probably if I was 12, I might have been self-conscious.
Right.
But yeah, I'm the guy at 8 running around the soccer field with a bike helmet. Everyone's like, "Who's this ridiculous kid is that?" I mean, we don't wear helmets in soccer. So yeah, no, full recovery, no residual, good to go.
That's great. And I love that. I mean, you're right. At 8 years old, you just own it because you want to play soccer. So whatever it takes, even if that means wearing a bicycle helmet when nobody else is. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, Court, then, I mean, having that really impactful moment with your dad on the phone and looking forward and then earning a scholarship to continue to play football and continue your career throughout it, how did you navigate then being an athlete and a student at the same time? So pursuing your dream of being in the Army while simultaneously pursuing the secondary kind of cherry on top dream of continuing your football career into college too.
Yeah, to be honest, Katie, I don't know this is going to be a very fun answer for your listeners.
Go for it.
But I think it was just really simple because, remember, I'm not at Florida. I'm not at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
I'm not at LSU. I'm at the Virginia Military Institute. You can't even have a car on campus until your junior year, right? I mean, it's like there is no autonomy in your day. You mean you if you miss class, you get an hour of walking around the courtyard with a rifle that you keep in your room. It's called a penalty tour, right? And so, I thrive in disciplined environments. I knew that about myself. That's what my draw to the service was. And so, for me, it was like, all right, I'm working my tail off in academics because I didn't share this with you, but VMI rejected my admission at first. It said, "Hey, Court, you're not smart enough.
Wow.
Your body of work just is not up to standard with what we expect here from someone at BMI." And I reapplied and I got in, and I made the dean's list every semester my entire career and graduated kind of in the top of my class. So, and I'm trying to say this and highlight this with as much humility as possible because I'm a humble person. But what I'm getting at is the environment was so structured you just thrive. I just thrived, because a lot of folks listen to the show that are teammates, classmates will say, "Hey, Corey, I didn't thrive," because it's also difficult. But for me, I could just thrive, right? My day was planned. I didn't have to worry about what I was wearing, because we wore uniforms every day. I went to class, and I worked my tail off, and there was really huge penalties for not being in class. And then I went to the football field, and there is no off season.
Yeah.
Right. So I did that for 4 years.
Wow. So
I really feel like, my best times at VMI were two moments: when I'm looking at it in the rearview mirror, when I'm driving away, when I get a chance to do that. And then I would say my spring semester, senior year, because after that fall football season, I was actually done. Like, there wasn't a spring football. All it was for me then at that moment was, what's my next challenge? And my next challenge is, I'm going into the Army. Wow. You better have your shit together, because that's your next playing field. And we're going to call that the battlefield.
Yeah, man. So, being able to thrive in that environment, and then having it from both ends. In the academics, and then too on the football field, it was just that constant living in structure. And then too, like you're saying, you're that in pursuit of the ultimate goal of entering the Army, with all the structure that lends itself there as well. And so, Court, coming up on graduation, leading into that spring semester where you're completing your football career and coming up on the close of your undergrad, what was going through your head? Were you just excited to take that next step? Were you sad at all that football was coming to a close? What was just going on with you mentally, emotionally at that time?
Yeah, what I would say is that I was hyper-focused. I was hyper-focused on my next season of life, which was being a soldier and being the best damn one I could be. And for a couple reasons. Competing at VMI, with all the military structure, makes it very challenging for them to recruit. And so we're not talking about me walking away from a 42-win, 4-year experience. Yeah. Right? We're talking about maybe 2 wins a season. Right? And so as incredible football was, and my teammates that I have deep love for, and, I wouldn't trade anything from being on the sidelines with a guy like David Budlong, or getting my uniform ready next to my man Andre Thornton, or Andre Curtis, or Big Mike Rogers. There's just so many people, Jose Mojica, guys that have made a huge impact on my life still to today. I knew those relationships would continue, and I was okay taking off the helmet and the cleats. And, I was going to the 82nd Airborne Division, America's Guard of Honor. Right. I grew up at Fort Bragg. I was already parachute qualified. I already spent some time in the summers when college getting qualified to jump out of airplanes. So I knew that the next season was going to be equally challenging and rewarding. Yeah.
Wow. And what made you decide you wanted to go into the 82nd Airborne? Jumping out of airplanes, and you had, that's a big thing to decide to go into. And you said, you'd been doing it for a while. You kind of had that intent already. So what made that decision kind of solidified for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of things. One is just probably the immaturity that I had at that moment, as young as I was. Meaning I'm not in the Army, and there's a lot of incredible units, but I grew up at Fort Bragg. My dad was assigned there for 7 years, so I understood that unit exists. My family was still living in North Carolina, so the Army, it's a worldwide organization. If I could go to North Carolina and be able to see my family while still soldiering, that was ideal for me. And then cut on a show like the Band of Brothers and just get some insight looking at a program like that and how that they message an organization like the 82nd Airborne Division. Those were the guys that made it happen. Yeah. They are they're steely-eyed killers. They're the industry standard on the most professional, most lethal fighting force that I could be a part of in my initial entry assignment. So it was clear to me. I've been chasing the best most of my life, and it's was not really any different for it to occur on my first assignment.
Yeah. So then, Court, making that transition that seemed kind of effortless in the sense of you felt that's where you belong, that's what you wanted to do. So transitioning then out of school and then into the 82nd Airborne and into your training and just going after this dream that you had on your heart. Can you walk us through then, that initial transition and then through your whole military career?
Absolutely. And how much time do you have, Katie?
All of it. Just go.
I'm only kidding.
So much time.
I'm only kidding. I'm just kidding, girl. I'll make this fast, right? But I will highlight a couple kind of decision points.
Yeah, please.
Key moments for me. So I joined the Army in 99. So this is pre-war. This is pre-9/11, almost a different culture within our national defense at this moment in time. And going back to, some major kind of inspirations in my life, I'm going to return to my dad. And my dad was initially in the Army in what we call the Signal Corps. And that means he came out of West Point and he was like a guy who knew communications and things like that. And then he applied to become and accepted to what we call the Uniform Services Health and Sciences School at Rutgers, where he was able to go compete and become a doctor. So then he was then a physician in the military. And so that's what I wanted to do. Right. So I wanted to be a surgeon. So my basic branch was with the Medical Service Corps. What I did is I had a platoon of about 32 combat medics that jumped out of airplanes, and we what we call a sling load, which we pushed ambulances out of the back of airplanes, and they were parachute kind of dropped to the ground. We would recover that equipment, and then we would then support what we called initial point of injury care for all the infantry that are also jumping in parachutes to kind of to seize an airfield, because that's the 82nd Airborne's mission. It's to go deploy somewhere, jump in to kind of seize an airfield, and then once that airfield is secure, then our defense can bring in follow-on airplanes and we can land them, and we can do what we call expand the lodgement, which means we can build up a presence in a foreign country to respond to the crisis. So, that's where it started. Well, let me fast forward to the morning of September 11th, 2001. And we kind of all know, if we're older than, I don't know, maybe the age of 20, what happened, on that day. And so I was sitting in the dining facility after doing some early morning physical training with a couple of my combat medics when the footage of the terrorist attack on this country came streaming into every TV that could be turned on at that moment in time. And I had an emotional response to that attack, like I think a lot of folks did, but I was already a soldier. I could do something about it. And so I said, this kind of dream to be a surgeon, I got to put on hold. How can I get into the fight? Because a fight is now here and we need to respond. And the only way for me to be more kinetic meaning be more of a put my gun on and let's go take this lethality to somebody else, was for me to assess and try out to be a Special Forces Commando in our Army Special Forces. And that's what I did. I was lucky enough to get accepted. I got through about the year and a half training. My regional focus was in Central and South America. So 7th Special Forces Group is where I got assigned when I graduated what we call the qualification course. A lot of guys will call it the Q course. And so now I was a qualified operational Special Forces Commando, Green Beret. My job was team leader, which basically means I'm in charge of a 12-man, highly trained, lethal unit that was comprised of specialists in weapons, specialists in demolition, specialists in communications, and specialists in medicine, meaning almost to the surgical level. So if we got hurt, we didn't need to call in the doc, because guess what? The doc's not with us, but we have a medic with us that's so highly trained that they can, kind of sustain our life in that moment of time. And so, that was my, in that moment, what I like to describe it as I found the locker room again in the team room environment, because, there was incredible mission focus. Not that there wasn't with my time in the 82nd, but the locker room was so different when I had my Special Forces team room. And let's remember now, we are at war, a nation at war. And so I had an opportunity to do 2 tours into Central and South America, one doing some counter-drug work in Colombia, and then another tour at the Bogota Embassy in Colombia. And then I had 4 rotations into Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. And that's not foreign to any veteran listening. Like, I'm not staking a claim that I'm special. I'm just one of many, because that's all the work that our incredible military has been doing for a while.
Wow.
So I retired in 2016, and then I kind of faced that next decision point, which is, what is my next chapter of my life?
Man. And so, Court, I mean, having that incredible journey that you took, I mean, through starting with the 82nd Airborne and then leading into being in the Special Forces, and I mean, until 2016, I mean, that's such a long and an incredible career. So one, thank you for your service. That's amazing. So, I mean, just thank you, and for being on this show and gracing us with your story and sharing this. It really does mean a lot. So thank you for that. But then two, so I mean, coming up on 2016, when you decided to retire and looking out towards that next step. So again, navigating yet another transition in your life, right? So from the ending of sports, graduating college, moving from soccer to football. I mean, even those smaller transitions leading you into this bigger one, kind of this life shift. What were you thinking? What were you looking for to do next? Did you know? I mean, how did you navigate that transitional period?
Yeah, again, this is a really special question for me, because I'm just going to be really vulnerable in this moment. And I want to say, at that time in my life, my daughter was 5, my son was 4, and they were incredibly important to my life. My wife at the time was not living with us as a family. She had decided to kind of live separate from us. And the biggest burden to my life was living into the expectation and the dream that I always had for myself, which was to be a family, to be a husband that was faithful, to be a father that was impactful, and to really honor what my God expected of me in that moment. And so the biggest problem I was solving for, like, it wasn't what am I going to do next, was how can I keep my family together?
Wow.
And I mean, we all have constraints. Like, let me share a little bit. Like, I think life is a constant state of transition, right? There absolutely are signature transition moments, but one of my mantras is we're always in transition. We're always evolving, and it's how we respond to those transition moments that kind of differentiate our ability to do it really well and at a high level, or to underperform in those moments. And so, you know, one of the things that helped me the most, because I think what your listeners are looking for is, what are some tactical habits or takeaways that can help, and that helped me. And I would say that, you know, I was fortunate enough to be part of an incredible organization called the Commit Foundation. And the Commit Foundation is a nonprofit that helps high-performing veterans through their transition experience. And I was accepted into their program, and I was given a coach. And I'm talking a professional certified coach, not a sport coach, but what we call an executive coach or a leadership coach, depending on how you want it to be branded. Her name's Allison Carroll. And I spent hours and hours with Allison trying to figure out, you know, what does a fulfilled life look like for me next, in this next season? And how do I do that well with all the things that are important to me? So, kind of just, I'm making a plug here for the power of coaching, because it was helpful for me. I'm not talking about counseling. I'm not talking about a therapist, right? Because I also had that, right? I mean, I was seeking, I was going to a therapist for marriage counseling, but in this moment, I'm talking about a coach. And so, you know, what I identified in those moments with Allison, along with trying to figure out answers to other questions about husband, father, was I got to have work, right? Retirement from the Army for me. I retired at 18 years, and with incredible transparency, I was a 2-time non-select for promotion, which is another story I can share, because it's kind of a very prideful moment for me. At that time in my life, I was with the Special Missions Unit, which is probably the most lethal unit and highly selective unit of Army Special Operations that we have, and yet I was passed over for promotion. And so I retired at 18 years, but my pension was about, you know, definitely just means, hey, go get that next job is what I'm getting at. So I did have to provide. The answer to what I did next was found in this question. What gets you up every morning, Court? What doesn't feel like work? You know, Daniel Goldman will talk about the zone. When do you have a quieted mind? And that inquiry, I realized anything in the health, wellness, or sports related field. And so that's what I made a commitment to do. I wasn't going to leave the North Carolina area because my wife at the time wasn't interested in leaving with me. And so I was constrained geographically, but I had to focus on what industry I wanted to serve next.
Wow. And so did you know, what that looked like? You answered the question for yourself of what industry and what really got you up in the morning where your passion was, but did you know what that looked like at that time, or did you just start to kind of unravel that and look deeper into what that could look like?
Yeah, I think the latter. I began to unravel and figure out what could that look like, because when you're in that transition moment, and I do a lot of my work today on helping people through this, but it's kind of like a lot of stars need to align, right? Who's in your network and how active are you with a network? And what I could tell you that moment in time, my network was all people in the military.
Yeah.
And guess what? They ain't hiring, right?
Right.
And so, so really it was, what did my network look like and how could I activate my network to find opportunity? Mm-hmm. But what has to happen before that, in my opinion, is that my headspace, and when I say headspace, I'm talking about is my awareness of who I am as a man walking this earth, and I want to use the word identity here, and is my awareness of what I'm really good at a high enough level that I can have a conversation with somebody else that's constrained by time, because when you network, you might have 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and the idea is to leave impact. Yeah. Could I do that well to network? And so I had to kind of grow in those areas. When I was focused on athletics, my network led me to UNC Chapel Hill. I had a chance to speak with their athletic director at the time, Bubba Cunningham. That opportunity did not kind of work into fruition. And I'm thankful for it now, because I think the life of college athletic departments is probably not as stable as I needed. Yeah. I had a close friend, Mark Ray, who I served with, who had moved on to be the assistant athletic director for West Point. And he was a close friend. Like when I say worked for him, like we worked in the same office side by side for a year and a half. And when Mark knew I came calling, and Mark is a great American, he began to activate his network. He told me there's a great company called Teamworks Innovations Incorporated, which is a sports software company in Durham, North Carolina. And so that's where I was hyper-focused. I got an opportunity to meet with the owner, Zach Naritas, his chief operating officer, Mitch Heath, and his director of sales, Paul Dudley. After about 2 to 3 days of interviews and conversations, this is kind of how it went. Zach said, "Hey, Court, I don't know what the hell you can do for me, right? This is the owner of the company, but I want you on my team, right?" Yeah. And he wanted me on the team because of kind of my body and work and experience. And I said, "Okay, Zach, I'd love to be there. What's your greatest need?" And his greatest need, he said, "I need someone to continue to sell my software. So I want you to be a salesman for me." And so that's what I did. I said, "Sign me up." And I committed to a 100-mile commute from my home in Hope Mills, North Carolina, driving in 100 miles every morning, working, driving home 100 miles every day. And that's what I did, right? Because of the constraints I had in my life. Wow. So again, it's a picture that's probably familiar to a lot of folks listening. It's not a really clear answer, but I was focused on my industry. There was an incredible organizational culture at Teamworks. It was a startup. I was a 41st hire. There were great people there, and I was just fired up to work there. And so that's kind of what led me to what I did in my first pivot out of the military.
Man, I really love, the tenacity and the drive, because if, like you're saying, you're entering this new industry, you didn't know exactly what you were going to do, but you knew you wanted to be involved in sports in some capacity and health and wellness. And so offering and asking the question of what is your greatest need, and then you are going to figure out a way to solve it. It's that grit and determination that comes from, your own background, being an athlete, being in the military, and knowing what it's going to take to get there. And so it's just, I think it's such a key piece of your story, among so many others, is that you have to decide, okay, I don't even know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to help them solve their greatest needs by plugging in and just working relentlessly at whatever I can do and however I can offer help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I will tell you is that I worked relentlessly as a sales guy, but I was remissioned. And what I mean by that, I mean that after about 8 months of selling software for that company, the owner of the company, again, Zach Maritas, who I'm still very close with today, basically came to me and said, hey, Court, we continue to talk about 3 things together. And here's the 3 things we talked about. Again, the context, 41-person company. I was hire number 41, multi-million-dollar valuation. This team was killing it in the athletic software space. And the owner was about to raise what we call a Series B round of funding, which tons of your listeners probably know this. An old military guy like me, it was like foreign language. It was like learning Spanish again. Series B, what are you talking about? Well, he's going to go out and find $30 million more of external investment. And he said, here's what we're going to do next, Court. I need to figure out how to sustain high performance over the long term. I need to figure out how do I build incredible office culture. And I need to figure out how do I mitigate burnout for my employees, because we're working really hard, but I'm afraid the ship's going to fall apart. And I continue to share my thoughts in and around that, because that was my focus in my latter year of Army Special Forces. Because again, persistent conflict, how do we keep the operators healthy? And when I say healthy, I'm talking holistic health, not just physicality. I'm talking about the mental health, the emotional health, all of those things, so they can continue to be on target and doing great things for this great country. The employee's very similar. How can we keep the employee on target? And he said, stop selling software, Court, and I just want you to build what you're talking about for me in my company. And I was remissioned out of sales. And I was then, he made a job title for me called Manager of Organizational Performance. And he wanted me to be the leadership coach, the first for the company, and kind of begin to stand up this department that we later called People and Culture.
Wow.
And I created a basically, we'll call it a corporate well-being program, but we didn't call it that. I called it Optimum. And Optimum had 5 lines of effort, and it was physical fitness, mental fitness, emotional fitness, spiritual fitness, and financial fitness. Because when I reflect on my life and I think about when I was really killing it, I was deliberately spending time in all of those lines of effort in my own life. And so I figured, why not build this program called Optimum? And what I did is I partnered with all of those employees internally, and I helped explore in their own life on a one-on-one intimate conversation, where are you doing along these 5 lines of effort? And do you want to invest time in one of those areas that's underperforming to help drive up your fulfillment? Because what me and Zach knew was that if those folks had great happiness and great health, they would do incredible work for the company, because their engagement with the company would be through the roof. So that was my first stepping into the work that I do today on my own with my own company as a high performance coach. Yeah. So there you go.
And that's so cool that it started there. One, from starting as a sales rep, and then all of a sudden that turning into just being driven and having that grit and wanting to genuinely help people in all levels of their fitness in different capacities, and then having that grow into what you're doing today. And so Court, from there, helping them out in that capacity and getting that new role and growing into that, helping people, how did it lead you into Court Whitman Inspiring High Performance? Did you found that company shortly thereafter? Was that a couple years later? What was the path to being an entrepreneur and being in this this light?
Yeah, I think mostly it was just a practical thing. For a little bit of background, I founded a company in 2005 while I was in the Army called Real Fitness, and it was an acronym. It stood for Rehabilitation, Exercise, and Advice for Life Fitness. And my whole goal was, I shared a little bit about me being the oldest of 5, but my younger brothers and sister were incredible athletes, much better than me. And I was the guy that was always driving back home, because I was in North Carolina with the Army. They were all competing in North Carolina. I was still attending their sports contests. My brothers won 3 state championships in football. And what I saw incredible athletes, young athletes, that in a lot of cases were single parent homes, where they didn't have a positive role model, meaning they didn't have the mom or didn't have the dad in the home. And I just wanted to help them, because I felt like if I could help them just get into college, they could reset their trajectory in their life. It was a miserable failure. It fell apart. I was at war. I couldn't do a lot with it. Yeah. But what the work that I do today is the remissioning of that initial idea. So I'm just trying to shed a little bit of light that my brain's kind of been thinking about how do I help people for a long time. But when I was asked by Zach Maritas at Teamworks to become that leadership coach, having had that experience with Allison through the Commit Foundation and had a coach, I said, hey, Zach, I actually know what this is, and I need to get qualified. I need to get certified to do this work, which he supported. I went to George Mason University, and I went to the Center for the Advancement of Well-Being, and I walked out of there with a certification in leadership coaching for organizational well-being. And then I began to coach on the side. So I was working full-time at Teamworks. You know, as an entrepreneur, if you talk to many, unless you got a whole bunch of money that someone in the family gifted you, you know, it starts as a side hustle.
Right.
You know, and so I started coaching on the side. And then when I said that I kind of stepped into owning my own business and it was just practical, I was worn slap out from the commute. You know what I'm saying? I mean, 100 miles in, 100 miles home.
Right.
I mean, Teamworks was great. I was able to get my kids on the bus in the morning, coupled with kind of the dysfunctional family unit, you know, where we weren't living together. And that's a whole different story. I won't go down that particular road in this moment. But it just was practicality. And so I was making enough money with a side hustle. I met a financial threshold, and I said, it's time for me to do something different. I stopped with my service at Teamworks, and I then spent all my time with my own company.
Wow. And I love that. I mean, you really did hit on a key point where you have to, it starts off as a side hustle, something you love and you're passionate about, and then with the ultimate goal of turning it into something that you can do full time. And so Court, from that time, making that decision of, okay, I'm going to start this as my side hustle, and then with the intent of wanting it to grow. What has your company grown into, Court Whitman Inspiring High Performance, and where do you hope it gets to? I mean, now with your podcast and everything that you've been doing, how have you grown it today?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of sometimes just pinch myself. I'm just thinking to myself, man, it's year 2 here, and I'm still paying the mortgage, and I'm still hitting some of the goals I set in January of 2020. So I think it's a challenging question to answer. Yeah. What I will share with you is a little bit of what we do and how we serve.
Yeah.
Just simply put, my vision statement is to inspire high performance with what I do. And my mission is to unlock hidden potential and develop competency so that every single person that I touch with my life is inspired and conditions are set for them to achieve the result that they want with their life. You know, I have 5 lines of effort within the business where my time's focused. My main effort is as a coach. I am a high performance coach, and most of my work is in one-on-one engagements, coaching people through this coaching competency that we call within this International Coaching Federation of a certified coach. I have a PCC certification. PCC stands for Professional Certified Coach, which just means I've accumulated more than 500 hours of paid one-on-one coaching with clients to date. I have a goal, this kind of address kind of the future where I want to go, to be a master certified coach. And master certified is 2,500 hours of paid one-on-one work. So coaching is my first line of effort. I also do some keynote speaking across the country. I've had an opportunity to connect with folks, you know, at the NFL, folks at the collegiate level, and folks in business, signature companies like Bank of America. That is a stretch goal for me. I'm not especially comfortable doing keynote work, but people have told me and encouraged me to do it. And that's kind of been the story of my life. Someone encouraged me to try special missions in the Army. His name was Jerry Patton. So I did it. Someone encouraged me, Zach Maritas, to become a leadership coach. So I did it. Someone encouraged me to go speak and tell my story. So I did it. Yeah. So my goal was about 4 of those a year. I also do some consulting. About 5% of my time is spent on consulting, and most of that consulting work is helping people acquire talent. I think I have an interesting perspective to share on how to hire incredible people. And I also help people build culture through vision, mission, and core value creation within a company, so they can kind of understand what their behavior needs to look like. Finally, I got a podcast. You mentioned on it, and that was kind of something that I also fell into. Someone said you should do it, so I did. And then I also do guided hikes for folks on the Appalachian Crest Trail. I've got a 50-mile hike planned for a client coming in December. I've got one October 24th where I'm doing 32 miles with some folks. And I also take folks out on the Black Mountain Crest Trail at summits Mount Mitchell which is arguably the toughest 11-mile hike on the East Coast, because Mount Mitchell is the highest point on the East Coast, and we kind of summit 7 or 8 different mountaintops as we go through that experience. And I just do that, one, because I love being outdoors, and I think people want to go primal. That's why the Spartan race freaking works, right? Because I sit in an office all day, but I just want to go primal a little bit, so I help people go primal. And so that's what I'm doing with my work. I don't really see it changing. I'm a one-man show. I'm a sole proprietor. And so I don't see much changing as I move forward.
Man. Honestly, is there anything that you don't do? I mean, you just guide people in all of these, they're seemingly, I mean, I guess if from an outside perspective, they could be random, but they're not random at all. They're all so interconnected because it's, like you said, it's all with that desire to help people and inspire that high performance. So whatever that looks like, you are offering that service. You are helping and meeting them where they're at.
Well, I appreciate that, but I would also say that not so fast. I would say that one of my biggest challenges becoming an entrepreneur and becoming a high performance coach was really accepting and settling into a branding. The cultures that I existed in for so long in the Army was one of incredible humility. Like when you become a Special Forces Green Beret, we are called quiet professionals, which basically means we're going to go do incredible work for this nation, and we're not going to want anything in return. And we're not really going to be on the news. And so what was hard for me was once I stepped into being an entrepreneur, there's a business side of providing for my family. And you can't just kind of say, oh, you know, I'm a Special Forces guy. That doesn't resonate. You know, you got to begin to establish a brand. And so, and the way that I was able to do that was, who are you? Well, you're a former college athlete. So let's serve college athletes with your work, which I love serving college and pro athletes because I think they struggle with the same things I struggled as a soldier, which is what is my identity when I walk away from 22 years of doing something in a unique culture. When I'm worried about, you know, I'm not putting the uniform on anymore, and what skills transfer. Yeah. You know, I think, you know, Earl Thomas, you know, safety for the Seahawks, or was safety for the Seahawks. And for someone else, I think it was in Dallas, bounced around, maybe Baltimore. But the bottom line is, I'm just using him to highlight at some point he's done, right? And then he's got to struggle with, who am I? Because I'm not a pro athlete anymore. And what the heck am I good at? Because unless you can figure that stuff out, you can't figure out your next step. And so I realized that I'm kind of good in that space. And so that's where my focus was and continues to be.
And I mean, I love that there's multiple layers of that transitional piece then, right? I mean, it's leading into what you're doing today and realizing that the need to provide for your family and wanting to pursue this passion of entrepreneurship, but then two, needing to identify and live into that brand and promote yourself in that way so that you could do this full time, so that you could make that living. And so Court, on this side, like you said, in the last year you've launched, or I guess in 2019, launching your podcast. What is your podcast and how does it work in tandem with this company that you've built?
Yeah, really interesting story. I had a really close friend, Chris Donahoe, who I served with in the military, and Chris has started up his own company, is doing incredible work. And one of the things that he did was he helps podcasters and basically listeners of podcasts, as they listen to things, they can make notes as they listen, and then it transcribes it. Anyway, I'm not going to worry out with that, but Chris basically said, hey, Court, you know, you should do a podcast, because I did a couple things on LinkedIn, just quick videos or whatever. And really, that was it. I just listened to a guy. It's like, no, give it a shot. It's called High Performance Pathways. And really, it's grounded on this idea that I believe everyone, to include your listeners, all have a different pathway to high performance. And hearing about the paths that others have journeyed along in their life is inspiring and it's informative. To be honest, Katie, it almost is exactly what you're doing with your work here, except that I'm highlighting the high performance pathways that our veteran community have walked along, and former athletes, because I think that former athletes and veterans of this great country can continue to do incredible things as they move forward through their transition experiences.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're right. I have the focus in on specifically athletes, but with your background, being able to highlight veterans and athletes, I mean, that's incredible because you're right. They've done amazing work and they continue to do so. And that's, I mean, there's no limit to what they can accomplish. So you being able to highlight that and bring that out. And then two, drawing on your own experiences, being both a former athlete and a retired military. I mean, you can reflect on that and use that to help them, promote them forward. And I mean, I love that it takes the form of one, your business, and then listening to people and say, hey, you should try this vertical or try and take your hand at this. And so it led you to this podcast then. So just promote that and put that message out there in just another light.
Yeah. And thank you for asking the question, right? And give me a chance to get that out there to folks.
Absolutely.
So appreciate it.
Of course, Court. So Court, I mean, reflecting back on this truly just honestly amazing journey that you've led and everything you've accomplished, the different transitions you've been through, the different people that you've helped, and looking forward, of course, with these goals that you want to accomplish within your own company and with your family and knowing, of course, that you will achieve those. I just have one final question that I ask all of my interviewees. What do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, it's a really easy question for me. It's one word. And the word's faithful. I want to be remembered as faithful to my God. I want to be remembered as faithful to, my children. For a long time, I want to be faithful to my wife. I'm divorced now, recently, in June of this year. And there was a multi-year separation, multi-year being defined as 4 years when we lived apart. There was 1 year when we came back together, but then we lived apart again, and I was faithful that entire time. And I will refuse to be unfaithful. And if there's just one thing that could be on my tombstone, that's what I wanted to read. Faithful.
Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest, check out the show notes at keepmovingforward.us. While you're there, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all things coming out of the KMF Collective Studio. Always remember, you can beat the odds and go the distance if only you keep moving forward.